following video contains content based around a video game with a T rating by the ESRB and is therefore intended for mature audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. Hello Guardians, and welcome to CBX Gaming. I'm the Chatterbox, and today we'll be talking about the new lore book in Shadowkeep, Aspect. This lore book provides a lot of insight into the fate of Praedyth and Kabr and the nature of time and the Vex. And we will also discuss why this book can be hinting even further to the return of the Destiny 1 exotic, No Time to Explain. The titles of the lore book and its entries are all categories with which we describe certain parts of speech in language. I'll provide a brief definition of each as we go along. Let's get started. Aspect. The way a given event or action influences the timeline, and how it extends further into time. Realis. A statement of fact. The Undying Mind lies in the garden, a ruin of metal given over to greenery. A barrow rising out of black soil rich with nitrogen and thought. Everything in the garden becomes of the garden eventually. Shed leaves decompose and fertilize the soil. So do the bones and unspoken ideas of everyone who couldn't find the end of the maze. So do the wordless songs of the Vex gardeners. They walk between the leaves, encouraging growth, laying down their bronze pathways, the only straight lines in all the garden's tangles. The Vex weave themselves into the garden, and the garden returns the favor. Harpies patrol in the air, as goblins do on the ground, their veins wafting in the still air on their endless untiring rounds. The pathways lie dull against granite, no power runs through them, not since the heart stopped beating, but the Vex of the Soul Divisive have programmed themselves to worship the darkness. It has given them power before, and the Vex understand time. What has happened before is, somewhere still, always happening. What will happen is happening now. Soil that lies fallow for a season will recover and produce again. Power that wanes will wax again, if the ground is ready for it. The Harpies stop where they are, a shudder running through each of them in order from one end of the garden to the other. A flicker, a wash of power coming from somewhere distant. A pulse. The power it carries lights up the pathways. The mind's eye blinks for a bare moment under its blanket of lichen. The power passes through the garden, overruns the Vex machinery within it, and floods the network beyond it. A moment held, like the shore after the tide rushes out. Motes of something that isn't dust shake in the air. The bronze pathways hum, a counterpoint to the goblin's song, and the garden's door vibrates with them. The garden has awoken. Volative. Desires, wishes, and fears. 227.97. Here's how it goes. You and Maya and Shim and Dwayne McNiah take your first cautious sliding steps out into the Vex information network. You get your footing, you've got to translate everything into metaphor to understand it here. And this is like tightrope walking on a greased line. You and Maya lean into each other, Shim slips, and you help him up. You explore, you go on. 227.3. Here's how it goes. You and Maya and Shim and Dwayne McNiah take your first cautious steps out into the Vex information network. You've got to translate everything in a metaphor to understand it here. And this is like doing a Fourier transform on yourself down the blade of a sundial. You fumble a step and Shim and Dwayne McNiah hoist you back up between them. You come up with a pair of skinned knees, but it's fine. You explore, you go on. 227.218. Here's how it goes. You all take your first confident steps out into the Vex information network. Maya says it feels like trying to get down a mountain on a surfboard. Dwayne McNiah makes grim pronouncements about avalanches, but he does this from a step ahead of you. You're all eager to get started. You come to a place that's a simulation of a world you don't recognize. Hills rolling with grain that's just faintly iridescent. The color of their stalks an echo of the purple sky. Something in the distance calls out. A bird maybe. Something that might be the traveler lies on the distant horizon. A moon-sized eggshell discarded on the ground. It's spiderwebbed with cracks. No light emerges from them. Dwayne McNiah walks too quickly, not testing the ground. He's gone, before you can blink, fallen through an unseen edge of the simulation. When you move to where he disappeared, tilting your head at a certain angle makes the world give itself over to empty black with glowing wireframe edges that don't do anything to illuminate it. Tilt your head back and there's nothing but purple wheat and the far-off call of an unknown bird. We have to go after him, says Maya. We can't just leave him. You're all still shocked. Faces drawn. Shim bends for a rock, squints, and tosses the stone, underhand, at the edge of the simulation. It disappears before it can hit the peak of its arc. He shakes his head. You and Maya repeat the experiment, heads cocked like nervy sparrows. When your rocks hit void, they disintegrate first into wireframe, and then into black nothingness. You retreat. You put up a marker at the rise of a hill. For all the good it'll do. You mourn. You go on. 227.7, you lose Shim. 227.33, you lose Dwayne McNiad. 227.200, the four of you cobble a radio together to contact the other teams. Every night when you stop to rest, you click through the channels hoping another team has had the same idea. On a cliff made of glass topped with a thin layer of sandy earth and a thinner layer of glass, you get a response that's nearly intelligible.
2267 nodding in for con.
You rest the next night at a seashore under the glass cliff. You wake up before dawn at the sound of screaming. You don't have time to find out what's happening before it happens very finally to you. 227.72, you lose Maya. 227.41, you lose Maya. 227.59, you lose Maya. You mourn. The thought of all the other Mayas out there doesn't help. They weren't the Maya you'd puzzled with over living basalt flowers, a world with 17 moons, a continent that Shim had sworn up and down was 16th century Australia, and that Dwayne McNiad couldn't be dissuaded from calling Pangea. You'd found a simulation with a city where you discovered a jewelry store, picked out a necklace, brought it home to her, and wished her a happy pseudo-anniversary. Maya didn't like bracelets, said they always fouled her work. Her hair had been getting shaggy again when it was due for a trim. She could never decide whether or not to grow it out. She laughed at you lifting weights to maintain simulated muscle, but she spotted for you all the same. There are other Mayas out there, layers of them, all the way up to the original, wherever she is. You hope they're doing well, but that doesn't stop you from missing this Maya, missing whatever arguments and discoveries you'd have shared in the rest of the lifetime you'd promised to one another. Shim and Dwayne McNiad pull you up from beside Maya's marker. A basalt lily rests on top of it, petals thin enough to let light through. You go on. This lore entry introduces us to the 227. Back in the Golden Age, 4 scientists from the Ishtar Collective found and extracted 227 simulated versions of themselves from a Vex construct. This group of 227 teams then unanimously decided to journey back into the Vex network as expeditionary teams to assist in unraveling its mysteries and to infiltrate unnoticed by the Vex. Some are simple entries and find themselves suffering a loss very quickly, but in one, we are actually painted a very beautiful picture of a perfect world simulation where scientists Maya Sundaresh and Kyoma Essie live together happily. Of course, perfect is relative because it's unspecified how Maya was taken in this last entry, but it is assured that Team 227.59 have had their eyes turned back towards their original mission. Mirative. New revelations, surprise. He's had this hallucination before. It's not that good as hallucinations go. Praedyth's radio's talking to him, voices rising out of the static.
This is 227.45, come in.
He wishes it at least used a familiar voice. Upahanan or Teiko or Kabr. He'd even take Amir at this point. He turns his head toward the radio, his cheek scrapes against granite. It hurts vaguely, the same way everything does, muffled by too much time and not enough light. You said that already, he tells the hallucination helpfully. It squawks.
I did? When?
Last time, or the time before. Chronology is a lost art in this cell.
Alert, Spelunkers, contact band 227.97. We might have a skyshock potential.
His voice fades. It hurts to talk.
Say again?
The hallucination has a new voice this time, sharper, male, nearly Mirish.
The band number?
Praedyth rolls back over to face the ceiling, blank as always. He sighs. He's cataloged constellations and its speckles, cats and ghosts and a squid or two.
Excuse me, whoever you are.
The first voice is back.
We're calling from band 227.17. If you were contacted by another 227 group, we really need to know.
You said that last time too. A third voice interrupts.
Did the other group use this radio frequency?
They did. Praedyth hasn't had the strength for fiddling with his radio lately, in new attempts to contact the world outside this cell. Hasn't had the strength for much but counting off meaningless intervals of time, waiting for the next window to chance a message.
We've tried this frequency at least a dozen times over the past month. It's never worked before.
Then what's changed? The question shakes him out of his torpor. Praedyth sits up, a wave of nausea following, and he repeats the question out loud. Maybe it's not a hallucination. Maybe he's finally breached the walls of the vault somehow. Maybe he has a chance. Hello? Are you still there? All he gets back is a wash of static. Whatever signal he was picking up, it's gone. So for this entry, we bring in Praedyth. Praedyth was a warlock and a member of Future War Cult. He was also a fireteam member of Kabr's original Vault of Glass expedition. Praedyth was thought to be dead, but was actually found to be lost in time. The Vex network, as it's known, expands through an infinite multiverse, and the timeline where all that is, was, and will be exist together. In this sense, Praedyth is both alive and dead, and also exists in any other possible state imaginable. In this entry, we find a captive Praedyth who assembled himself a radio using various components from his own armor. He then picks up a transmission from one of the 227 expedition teams. How is this possible? Has something changed in the Vex network? Perhaps this was due to the reawakening of the Black Garden. Perhaps those pulses that emanated from the Black Garden that extended outside of it actually went as far as entering the Vex network itself. And therefore, those pulses from the Black Garden extend far out into infinite time and space. Gnomic, cryptic, enigmatic generalizations.
He is. He is not. He is walking in the garden. He is talking, silent, singing.
Watch your six! Don't worry about me. Grow, grow, grow!
He holsters his gun to gesture. He holsters his gun to drink. His gun is rusted into its holster, and he will never pull it out again.
How bad can it be? How bad can it be? How can we grow? Grow! Grow!
A titan is a wall, a shield, a cup, filling itself to overflowing. The container changes the shape of its contents, but the contents change the nature of the container, and the nature is eternity.
Who knows what's listening? It's listening! It's saying grow! 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 There is a shape that is his mind, and the shape is protect. The shape is sacrifice. The shape is grow! He was named too well. He is his own grave, and the cut on his left hand will never heal. In this lore entry, we focus on an unnamed titan. From the references, we can infer the entry refers to Kabr, who sacrificed himself to become the Aegis shield from the Vault in Destiny 1. Kabr must also exist in every infinite state lost to the Vault and the Vex network, as Praedyth was. In this entry, we also have 3 variants of every sentence, referring to possibly 3 different variants of Kabr throughout the Vex network. One who is alert and on the move and in a fighting stance. One who is more calm and content and at peace and possibly even dead. And one who is frantic, possibly insane, lost to the Vault, or most likely the Garden itself, and has now become a gardener or a slave to the Garden. We can conclude that the final Kabr is now lost to the Vault or the Garden, as his gun has rusted, as we often refer to the Vex of the Garden lost in time, covered in rust and moss. Grow, 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 referring to the nature of the garden itself and the moss and vegetation covering the rest of the Soul Divisive. The name Kabr is also a literal translation of the word grave in Urdu. I believe that with this information, we now know that somewhere out there is a Kabr that works for or alongside the Vex and has become a part of the Garden. Will we get to fight him, or have we already fought him? Could Kabr be the Undying Mind, or the Consecrated or Sanctified Mind? The current state of the Vex network means anything exists in every possible state that it could. And anything that could happen has happened and will be happening again. So, I guess it's a possibility. But likely? Who knows? And that concludes part 1 of the Aspect Lore book. To recap, we discussed the entry of Realis, which was a visit to the Black Garden, and a beautifully painted picture of a hibernated Vex haven, which has begun to awaken. We discussed Volative, an introduction to the Ishtar 227, and a look at the journey of several of the teams of 227 Vex Network adventurers. Then there was Mirative, a look into the journey of Praedyth, a guardian who at this point, to our knowledge, was lost in time. We see that he came into contact with several teams of the 227, and we were also hinted at the phrase Skyshock, which is a well-disputed phrase within Destiny lore, but most commonly the belief is that Skyshock refers to a weapon or defense system that was used by the Warmind to protect the Earth and the Moon from invading sources. Some Guardians even believe that Skyshock was used against the Traveler when the Warmind interpreted it to be a threat to humanity, but that is unsubstantiated. Next, we have Gnomic, a cryptic entry that most likely speaks about Kabr, who is in fact not dead, but also lost to the Vault in time like Praedyth. The message most likely refers to 3 different parallel timeline Kabrs, one of which might actually have become a custodian of the Black Garden, or possibly a Vex himself. Thanks for watching, everyone. Stay tuned for part 2 of the Aspect Lore book, which comes out this Friday, December 6th. Until next time, I've been your host, the Chatterbox, and thanks for stopping by CBX Gaming.